The hearing will come to order. The subcommittee meets today to receive testimony on the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force budget requests for combat aircraft programs for fiscal year 2012. We welcome our visitors for today. The first panel is Mr. David Van Buren, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, also representing the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Vice Admiral David Venlet, Program Executive Officer for the F-35 aircraft program, and Mr. Michael Sullivan, Director of Acquisition and Sourcing. The subcommittee invited Dr. Ashton Carter, Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, to provide testimony today, but he was unable to appear. The second panel will be Vice Admiral Mark Skinner, Principal Military Deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, Lieutenant General Robling, Deputy Commandant of the Marine Corps for Aviation, Rear Admiral Kenneth Floyd, Director of the Air Warfare Division of the U.S. Navy, Lieutenant General Mark Shackelford, Military Deputy Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Lieutenant General Carlisle, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations Plans and Requirements, U.S. Air Force. Thank you all very much for accommodating us today and coming to this hearing. We have a number of issues to cover today, but my opening remarks will focus primarily on the F-35 program. The F-35 is a complex program. There is no question significant technology and manufacturing capabilities have been demonstrated. The thousands of people working at the major contractors, as well as the many suppliers and vendors, deserve a great deal of credit for their achievements. But with tens of billions of dollars having been invested in F-35 development to date, the program has encountered a series of major cost increases and schedule delays. Last year, the F-35 program experienced a Nunn-McCurdy cost breach that required a restructured program. The new program executive officer conducted a technical baseline review this past year, which again has resulted in a restructured program and additional projected cost increases and program delays. Concerns about the F-35 program expressed annually for several years by the GAO, having gone unheeded by the Pentagon, have largely been right on the mark. Our first panel today includes Mr. Mike Sullivan from the Government Accountability Office, who has provided the committee independent reports on the F-35 program for many years. In 2001, when the department began the F-35 program, the GAO noted that the critical technologies for key aircraft performance elements were not mature and recommended that DoD delay the start of system development until critical technologies matured to acceptable levels. The DoD did not delay start of development and procurement costs have climbed from $233 billion to over $382 billion since that time. In 2006, the GAO noted that the DoD planned to enter production with less than 1% of testing complete and recommended a delay in production until flight testing demonstrated the F-35 would perform as expected. DoD did not delay the start of production, believing the risk level was appropriate. Since that time, estimates for average F-35 procurement costs have increased over 30%. In 2008, the DoD implemented a mid-course risk reduction plan to replenish management reserves by reducing test resources. The GAO testified that this plan would likely actually increase risk and recommended that DoD revise the plan to address concerns about testing, use of management services, and manufacturing. Since then, development costs have increased 22%, and recent restructurings in the past year have added test aircraft back into the program. I might also add that in 2007, the GAO testified that experience with the first alternate engine program suggested F-135 and F-136 engine competition could generate savings and benefits of up to 20% if contractors are incentivized to invest their own money to remain competitive and produce more reliable engines, resulting in lower maintenance costs. Unfortunately, the Pentagon has also rejected the GAO's conclusions on the F-35 alternate engine program and has submitted a budget each year since fiscal year 2007 that would eliminate competition for the $110 billion F-35 engine program. This year, we are told that an additional $4.6 billion and 2 years have been added to the development schedule. Another 124 aircraft have been removed from the planned buy for the next 5 years, We have yet to be provided an estimate of the current total F-35 program procurement costs. The fiscal year 2010 to completion of development cost estimate for the F-35 primary engine contract is increased from $385 million to $2.1 billion, 445% since February 2008. However, a portion of this increase is due solely to cost increases associated with F-35B lift fan components and schedule increases in the aircraft program, and not the F-135 engine itself. For those who might ask the question regarding F-35 program costs, at what point does this program become unavoidable? I would respond that if you believe our nation needs a fifth-generation stealth fighter, you have no choice. There is no viable competition for this aircraft. And I would also point out that if the Pentagon has its way, that is exactly the position we will be in for the engine for this aircraft by giving a decades-long $110 billion sole source contract to the primary engine manufacturer for the F-35. Having no choice but to continue to pay for F-35 development and procurement cost increases is exactly why many of us do not believe that it is wise to create the same monopoly situation with the F-35 engine as we have done for the F-35 aircraft. That would comprise ultimately up to 95% of the U.S. fighter fleet. Given the $2.6 billion investment already made in competitive engine program, the Pentagon's analysis indicates that over the life cycle of the F-35 aircraft program, that it would cost no more for a two-engine program than a one-engine F-35 program. The Pentagon is concerned with the near-term investment cost to maintain a competitive program. Initial cost DoD incurs to initiate any competitive military acquisition program. This year, the cost to maintain a competitive engine program represent 8/100ths of 1% of the Pentagon's budget request. The option is whether we believe that it is wise for 8/100ths of 1% of the defense budget to foreclose the option for competition on the only element, an estimated $110 billion element of the F-35 program that Congress agrees is required for our forces. Discussion of the competitive engine issue has been made more difficult by misstatements regarding the F-35 engine program by former and current members of the administration. The former Deputy Secretary of Defense for Secretary Gates, when he first became Secretary of Defense, wrote an op-ed indicating, and I quote, "The F-35 second engine was not included in the Defense Department plan during or before my tenure as Deputy Secretary," unquote. This statement is a total misrepresentation of fact. The F-35 development program began in 2001. The July 2000 Joint Strike Fighter Program Propulsion System Acquisition Strategy includes the design, development, and qualification and production of a primary and an alternate propulsion system to support the JSF. In November 2006, the same former Deputy Secretary signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the 8 partner nations for the F-35 program, agree, and I quote, "The production work will include, but will not be limited to, the following: production of the JSF air vehicle, including propulsion systems, both 135 and 136. This from the same administration official, very close to the previous quote, which said that it had never been anticipated. It's a total mystery how the former #1 advisor, Secretary Gates, could write that the F-35 engine was not included in the Pentagon's plan during and before his tenure, when the alternate engine was in the original F-35 acquisition strategy, and he signed an agreement with 8 other nations to produce the alternate engine. Some opponents of the competitive engine point out that the competitive engine is 3 to 4 years behind the primary engine, without also stating that it is the case because the acquisition strategy is the F-35 engine. The 136 engine development was started 4 years after the 135. The 135 engine is about 24 months behind schedule. The 136 is about 2 to 3 months behind schedule, which means if the engines had been started at the same time, the second engine would be now nearly 2 years ahead of the first engine in development. Some opponents of the competitive engine say there already was a competition for the F-35 engine program when, as prescribed by the F-35 acquisition strategy, a sole source engine development contract was signed with primary engine manufacturer in 2001, and a sole source contract was signed with a competitive engine contract in 2006. Some say that the primary engine has 20,000 flight test hours when the primary engine has in fact accumulated less than 1,000, only 950 flight test hours, and continues to have modifications being made to achieve required capabilities. It takes 200,000 flight hours to mature a fighter engine. We have had tens of billions of dollars in overruns on the F-35 development and procurement program, years of delay, and many misjudgments of risk remaining in the F-135 program. Secretary Gates, speaking in Fort Worth, Texas in August of 2009, said, and I quote, "My impression is that most of the high-risk elements associated with this development program are already behind us. And I felt a good deal of confidence on the part of the leadership here that the manufacturing process, that the supply chain, that the issues associated with all of these have been addressed or are being addressed," unquote. Since Secretary Gates made this statement, the F-35 program cost has increased $50 billion, has had 2 major schedule delays, and procurement of 246 F-35 aircraft has been deferred to after 2016. F-35 development competition has slipped from 2014 to 2018 and increased by nearly $10 billion to $56.4 billion, approximately 20%. The development test program has added 3 years to its schedule, 1/3 more flights, and Secretary Gates has put the Marine Corps short takeoff and vertical landing F-35B on a 2-year probation to evaluate and engineer solutions to the F-35B. Major misjudgments of risk in the F-35 program have been made at the highest levels of the Pentagon over a number of years. Is it possible that wrong judgments are being made on the need for competition for the F-35 engine? What gives us confidence that the engine decision is anything other than a short-term decision? Just like many of us have had to watch the cost of the F-35 program spiral upward, many of you could have to live with a sole-source F-35 engine decision for decades to come. Before we begin, let me call on the ranking member of the subcommittee, my good friend Mr. Reyes, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to welcome our panelists here this morning. As today's hearing on combat aviation programs is a critical part of this subcommittee's work for the year, we're very much interested in listening to their testimony. Other than large Navy ships, the DoD spends more procuring aircraft of all types than any other kind of weapon system. In FY12, the total request for Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps aircraft procurement is $33.9 billion. By comparison, the Army's total procurement request for FY12 is only $24 billion. That doesn't mean that the aircraft aren't worth the price, but it does mean that we must carefully review the DoD's request and ensure that the funds are, as always, spent wisely. Of the many topics today's hearing will cover, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter is probably the most critical issue. When the program schedule was developed, the DoD intentionally took some risk in ramping up large-scale production before a significant amount of test flights had been completed. The DoD is now living with both the benefits and the downsides of this plan. The good news is that we are building a lot of aircraft, thus learning a lot about how to ramp up production while at the same time gaining production efficiencies. The downside, on the other hand, is that we are finding a lot of things in test flights that will now have to be fixed during later production or through later modifications that could prove much more expensive. With regard to the alternate engine, while I do not support continuing with the F-136 alternate engine, I do, and I want to emphasize this, share the Chairman's concerns about Congress being given accurate information from DoD. Regardless of the outcome, we have to deal with the facts at hand and not the spin. A final issue I hope to hear about in today's hearing is the apparent disconnect in aircraft procurement strategies between the Air Force and the Navy. The Air Force has been adamant that it only wants to buy 5th-generation fighter aircraft in the future, and thus has refused to consider procuring F-16s or F-15s while the F-35 is under development. On the other hand, the Navy is planning to continue to procure 4th-generation FA-18 Super Hornets for many years while waiting on its versions of the F-35. One benefit of the Navy's approach is that the F-35 is further delayed. They can more easily adjust fighter production to ensure that there are enough planes to meet future requirements, as they did this year by adding another 40 FA-18s to their budget request. The Air Force, on the other hand, is essentially betting its entire future and force structure on the F-35. While we all hope that the F-35 proceeds as planned from here on out, to me, this does seem like somewhat of a risky approach. As a result, I look forward to hearing from our Air Force witnesses what the backup plan might be for additional delays in the F-35 strike fighter program. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Thank you. Without objection, all witnesses' prepared statements will be included in the hearing record. Mr. Van Buren, please proceed with your opening remarks, and you will be followed by Admiral Benlett and Mr. Sullivan. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chairman Bartlett, Ranking Member Reyes, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee regarding the Joint Strike Fighter. The Joint Strike Fighter is the Department of Defense's largest acquisition program, and its importance to our national security is immense. The JSF will form the backbone of U.S. air combat superiority for generations to come. For our international partners who are participating in the program, the JSF will become a linchpin for future coalition operations that will enhance the strength of our security alliances. Following the JSF Nunn-McCurdy criteria certification in June 2010 by Dr. Carter, the F-35 Program Office under Admiral Vinlett conducted the most comprehensive review of the JSF program ever accomplished. A technical baseline review assessed the cost, schedule, and technical risk of the work required to complete the F-35 system development and demonstration program. The TBR involved 120 technical experts reviewing every detail of the program over a period of months, supported by the full strength of the Air Force and Navy's tactical aircraft experts. As a result of the TBR, Secretary Gates directed several changes to the program. He directed the program decouple testing of the short takeoff and vertical landing model from the carrier and conventional takeoff and landing variants to ensure that any problems with the STOVL would not delay the other variants. Additionally, the Secretary added resources to the System Design and Development Program through its completion in 2016. Extra development funding will allow us to complete additional testing found necessary by the TBR and properly fund testing cost estimates that were previously estimated at too low a level. The Department further decided to hold production levels to 32 aircraft in FY12. This allows the final assembly process at Fort Worth to mature and reduces concurrency in the program. Beginning in FY13, the Department will increase the production by a factor of 1.5 per year as recommended by the Manufacturing Review Team. Finally, the Secretary placed the STOVL on probation for 2 years, as was noted, pending further successful development. The probation period limits the procurement of 6 F-35B aircraft in both FY12 and FY13. This 2-year period will provide additional time to resolve engineering and technical challenges, and at the end of the 2-year probation, Department leadership will make an informed decision on how or whether to proceed with STOVL. The Department recognizes the concerns of Congress and the taxpayers regarding the cost overruns of this program. The Department estimates that the independent production unit cost estimates of the JSF have nearly doubled since the program began. This cost growth is simply unacceptable and must be reversed. The Department will be performing a rigorous LRIP 5 should-cost effort. This process has already shown some success with cost reductions in LRIP 4, a fixed-price incentive fee contract with a target cost substantially lower than the independent cost estimate. The program's management over the past year has put in place the right fundamentals and realistic plans using sound systems engineering processes, and we are monitoring and tracking performance on a continuous basis using detailed metrics. Overall, there is much work still ahead of us, but through the multiple reviews and adjustments in the past year, Dr. Carter and I believe we have put the program on sound footing for the future. In our opinion, the TBR has given the Department the best basis it has had to plan and manage the JSF program. Admiral Vinlett and I have submitted this detailed written statement for the committee, Admiral Vinlet also has an opening statement, but I do wish to thank you again for the opportunity to discuss the program. Admiral Vinlet.
Chairman Bartlett, Ranking Member Reyes, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today. By any measure of progress or performance, the F-35 program has not delivered acceptable results. Previous reports and investigations cite a history of program plans and replans to which program performance does not measure up. You may fairly ask why any new plan presented can be depended upon to deliver to expectations or be bounded and under control. The changes and decisions reflected in the President's 2012 budget are a result of 120 technical experts from the F-35 Program Office and the Services Systems Commands, reviewing the remaining work from the bottom up. This plan derives its higher confidence by embracing fundamentals in every technical and business discipline. There is grounding in realism about cost, schedule, and performance. Such a grasp on fundamentals and realism is the distinguishing characteristic that makes this plan different from all before it. This plan has resilience and prudent reserve to absorb expected further learning and discovery. This is a plan resourced with realism that will begin building a record of dependable results. I am honored to respond to your further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
Good morning, Chairman Bartlett, Ranking Member Reyes, and members of the subcommittee. It's my pleasure to be here again to talk about the Joint Strike Fighter program, DoD's largest acquisition ever and so important to plans for recapitalizing our Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps tactical aircraft. I'll make some brief comments and then be happy to take your questions. Mr. Chairman, over the last 13 months, defense leadership has taken positive action to restructure the Joint Strike Fighter program, and we strongly support these actions, many of which are overdue, that we and some other organizations have previously recommended. We have been concerned since program start about the risks posed by the high degree of concurrency between testing and production activities, and have consistently recommended reducing annual procurement quantities until sufficient testing is completed. The Secretary's substantial reduction of 246 aircraft through 2016 certainly helps lessen concurrency risk. Even with that reduction, however, total development cost is now estimated at $56.4 billion and will not be completed until 2018, a 26% cost increase and a 5-year schedule slip from the 2007 baseline. We also note that over the next 5 years, annual funding requirements for procurement more than double and annual quantities more than triple. Looking forward, a focus is on affordability, which is critical. With future budgets likely to be austere, the program is planning an unprecedented amount of funding for a sustained period, averaging more than $11 billion per year through 2034. And this does not reflect the effects of the Secretary's all of the effects of the Secretary's recent restructuring actions. We understand the Department has not yet calculated the net effects financially from deferring aircraft quantities from the near term to future budgets, and we expect future procurement funding requirements to increase once this is done. The program had mixed results during the year of 2010, achieving 6 of 12 major goals that it set for itself and progressing in varying degrees on the rest. There are some encouraging signs. The pace of flight testing, for example, accelerated in 2010, accomplishing 3 times as many flights as in the 3 years prior combined. Also, there is much more work in process on the factory floor, and we've taken annual tours of the factory floor and found it much busier this year than in the past. These signs of improvements are counterbalanced with continuing setbacks, however. For example, while the Air Force's conventional variant and the Navy's carrier variant performed well in limited flight tests, the short takeoff and landing variant, essential to the Marines' future aviation plans, had numerous technical problems and, has been stated earlier, DoD's directed a 2-year period to slow down procurement to engineer solutions. The final delivery of test and production aircraft is still lagging. That's a big concern for us, and a majority of improvements that the expert review teams did recommend have not yet been implemented. Improving factory throughput and the global supply chain are now urgent priorities for the program. Also, design changes continue at higher rates than expected and may increase further as flight testing continues. This indicates the design is not fully stable several years after critical design review. Finally, integration and testing of software, essential for achieving 80% of the JSS functionality, is significantly behind schedule as it enters its most challenging phase. Mr. Chairman, let me conclude by saying that the program's time to perform to cost and schedule targets has come. The GAO pointed out several years ago that official estimates were unrealistic, that they were based on optimistic assumptions rather than robust systems engineering knowledge, and that plans to cut test assets and reduce flight testing during the mid-course risk reduction plan were ill-advised. And we have consistently pointed out risks to the program that the Department has largely ignored until now. We now support recent restructuring efforts and believe that the added funding, extended time to complete systems development, and a more robust flight test program provide a much more achievable program. However, let me say loud and clear again that this program still lags behind expectations and is not out of the woods yet. Continued strong oversight will be critical. Now is a time for much more disciplined decision-making concerning critical aspects of the program, such as the Stovall variant's inefficient schedule, overall cost controls on the program, annual funding actions that the Department and the Congress will have to make, and management of critical software development efforts. The program has been supported through many turbulent years, and it does represent the fifth-generation fighter, and it's a very important piece of our tactical air portfolio. There's been a lot of smaller, perhaps lower priority programs that have taken on some of the cost sharing for the Joint Strike Fighter as it goes along. After 10 years of product development and 4 years of production, it's time for the program to make good on its estimates and deliver aircraft in a predictable manner. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my statement. I await your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank all of you for your testimony. As is usually my practice, I will delay my questions until the end, hoping that my colleagues will have asked them all. Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony. I have two questions, one for Admiral Van Lett dealing with the testing results and production plans, and the other one for Mr. Sullivan regarding the issue of the software and its development. For the Admiral, your testimony states that due to a series of problems discovered during testing, Secretary Gates placed the F-35B short takeoff and landing variant JSF on probation for 2 years. He also directed major changes to the program that will add hundreds of additional test flights. While test data to date shows the other two F-35 variants somewhat ahead of schedule in this testing, but the 35B continues to fall behind. So my questions are, when exactly will the program, in your opinion, have enough flight test data to ask to get off this probation designation? And secondly, in the meantime, does it make sense to put the 19 additional F-35B aircraft on contract for production, which are being paid by FY10 and FY11 funds? And then finally, why not build more of the other variants that are not on probation instead of the 35B?
Thank you, sir. Your reference to the Stovall falling further behind, I would lead with the recent months' progress has been quite remarkable for the Stovall aircraft. It has flown quite a bit more. It's accomplished a lot more vertical landings really since the turn of the year. We have 4 of them return to flight test. If I might just start with a current event issue, sir. You mentioned discovery and flight test. Last week we had a dual generator failure on an Air Force test aircraft at Edwards Air Force Base. To take the time to understand what caused that, what its impacts were, we grounded the entire test fleet and our first 2 production aircraft. Over the weekend, they were able to do an investigation, tear the hardware apart. They understand what caused that failure and the failure of the other generator. And yesterday, they determined that there was a difference in configuration of generators in the first test aircraft built. This was a new configuration generator that was cut in. And the differences gave confidence that we could return the older generator aircraft to flight. So yesterday, AF-1 flew at Edwards, and today, the 4 Stovall test aircraft are on the schedule to fly today at Pax River. So I mentioned resilience in the schedule. This generator is actually an early opportunity to test that resilience in our schedule to see if we can absorb this and learn from it. So when will we have enough data to basically come off of probation for the Stovall, sir? The effect of probation was the suppression of the procurement quantities. The test program has been planned and is having detailed adjustments made to it this year, so it is going full speed ahead, and it was planned to do that even before probation was pondered. So the actual focus in this probation period, and I'm meeting with the Commandant every month. In fact, this week, Friday, I meet with my shipmate behind me here and several others to keep the Commandant informed. We're going to focus on several characteristics. The first of all will be weight. We will watch how the weight is affected by what we learn in flight test. We will watch how it performs in its first sea trials scheduled this fall. Our progress in testing has improved our confidence of our ability to meet what is our now planned date of late October, early November for its first sea trials. I know that was originally planned to be late last year, slipped into the spring. Our current planning and progress is giving us good confidence that we will make this fall. So the weight, the ship operability, the discovery of flight test that illuminates what we expect as key performance parameters to be, and then its progress towards achieving an airworthiness determination by the Technical Systems Command, and its ability to fly unmonitored in the fleet's hands without test instrumentation and engineers following it. Those are the characteristics that we will inform and we will evaluate, and it will be a combination of those things, not any one particular thing that will lead to the determination of the confidence to go forward near the end of 2012. You asked about the wisdom of continuing to buy. These are certainly challenging decisions. The complexity of the program and concurrency, the path that we've set about to test and build and deliver to the fleet and operate at the same time. This is our first year of experiencing that. We're delivering our first production aircraft this year, and we will be standing up testing for the Air Force in Eglin Air Force Base. Now I'll comment, I have to wait and see what this generator issue is going to do to that. There's nothing known on that. We're evaluating that as we sit here. But to break production would add additional cost. I think the Secretary in this budget has moderated. It's spread production out to reduce the impacts of concurrency and the possibilities of modification due to learning and test. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'll have some follow-up, but I'll wait until the next round. Let me go to Mr. Sullivan on software. In your testimony, you discussed the potential additional delays that could result from the software development effort within the F-35 program. And specifically, you note that each software block is likely to be at least 2 years which obviously delays the overall program. The two questions I have, are these delays primarily the result of over-optimistic initial estimates, or are they performance shortfalls by the contractors? That's number one. Number two, given the size and the complexity involved, is the program doing well compared to the private sector, in your opinion?
To answer your first question, I think your point about underestimating the time and resources that would be needed at the beginning of the program is probably the right answer. I think the program has found, number one, that the lines of code that are needed to make up all of the performance and functionality that software has to bring to this weapon system has grown by about 40% since that time, and it's already probably the most software-laden aircraft ever developed. I know it's more than the F-22 or the F-18EF. So I think they underestimated the enormity of the challenge for software development. They didn't plan for enough time, and I think that they did not plan to keep software engineering experts around long enough. That's been I think one of the cost drivers on the program as well. So I think that, from our point of view, is the answer to the first one, is they were optimistic in their original estimates. With regard to your second question, I don't have a whole lot of experience comparing defense programs with commercial, but we have done some work in the commercial world to find best practices in software development and software engineering. And I'd say that the commercial world takes the idea of spiral development a lot more seriously than what we see typically on a weapon system acquisition. What you have on the Joint Strike Fighter is that they want to go all the way to the program will not be complete and development is not complete until they have all of the software delivered Block 3 and beyond, which tends to go beyond what you might think of as the 95% solution, whereas in the commercial world I think they're much more flexible with incrementally releasing software, getting better software to the field, if you will, more quickly, although it's not the ultimate. You know, they spin out. I think they're much more flexible. They reuse software a lot more. They don't rely as much on unique software writing and proprietary software and things like that. You know, that would be my observations on that.
And I think it's interesting because in last week's hearing, we talked about just that issue, that sometimes it doesn't make sense to and unrealistic to expect a 90-95% level when 75-80%, and then evolving through that process. Yes. So yes, that's something that I think the committee certainly understands, and maybe we can influence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Lovianda.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield my time to Mr. Schuster.
Mr. Schuster.
Oh, Mr. Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the gentleman from New Jersey for yielding me his time. Mr. Van Buren, on the F-35, I have a couple of concerns. First and foremost, on the alternative engine. We've seen a GAO report that's come out and says the alternative engine is, over the long run, it's cost neutral, one engine or two engines. So first I wonder if you could address that, along with that I've read a report that General Hines, the former Joint Strike Fighter program manager, stated that he believes that the Pentagon hasn't considered, under his opinion, the operational risk involved with doing away with the alternative engine, and looking at having an alternative engine. Some of the other benefits that technological innovation, enhanced contractor responsiveness, and I might add, keeping the cost down, which was, I think we've seen over and over again when you have competition, and a more robust industrial base. So I wonder if you might address those concerns that I have, and
Well, the issue of the alternate engine is clearly a case of constrained resources. And currently in our defense budget, we feel that we do not have the resources to fund the alternate engine. The monies need to be put on higher priority programs. Secondarily, the issues of stability in the current engine, the F-135, it's performing very well. It's very mature. There have been no major problems in the flight test program to date. And I would say that the JPO has concluded a fixed price type contract with Pratt & Whitney on that engine, and that they appear to be working well to get the cost price down.
Then you would agree that in the short term, it's a $430 billion savings is what we're going after, but the long term, you do agree that there would be, the cost would bear out, it would be neutral, it would be the same cost by having the two engines, and reduce, according to General Hines, operational risks?
I don't agree with General Hines on the operational risk. What I will say in the near term is that it's an expenditure of well over $2 billion, approaching $3 billion, funds that we currently do not have.
And again, we're going to have, in 25 years, it appears we'll have 95% of our fighter fleet will be the F-35. That's correct?
Considerable portion of our fighter fleet for the Air Force. I'd let the Navy speak to the force structure, but for the Air Force, certainly the F-35 will become the largest element of our force structure. And I would say that the challenge that we have is to get to the should cost numbers, aggressively working the reduction in the per unit cost, not only for the engine but also for the airframe. So
one engine, you're willing to make the bet 95% of the Air Force's fleet having that one engine, you're confident that that's not going to cause operational an increase in operational risk when you have that kind of we're going to rely on that single engine.
I'm confident with this engine.
And you talked about unit cost. Economies of scale dictate that the more you produce, generally it drives costs down, but yet we continue to decrease the numbers that we're purchasing. And you're certain, or you feel certain, that that's not going to drive up the cost per unit if we reduce the quantity, and we continue to reduce the quantity that we contract to produce?
Well, I will say that that particular factory in Middletown, Connecticut, is also responsible for producing F-119 and F-117 engines for our F-22 and C-17 fleet, and also will be producing the engines for our KC-46A tanker. So we're confident with the situation up in Connecticut.
But when you're switching over assembly lines, they're not the same engine, correct?
No, they go in parallel lines coming through the factory.
Well, again, most economics I've studied that when you reduce the units, you're going to drive up, or when you reduce the number you order, you're going to drive up the unit costs. And even if a plant's producing an engine, it's a different engine. Every time you switch over, it seems to me there's going to be an increase in cost. So I have a great concern that we're going with one engine. I know the House just recently voted to go with one engine, but again, with the reliance on the F-35 that we're going to be placing on it, with 95% of the Air Force fleet, with our allies moving in that direction, again, I just think it's in the short term, I think we're making a mistake by going with one engine, and I hope that as we move down the road, we can change that policy, because again, I think there's so many benefits to having a competitive program, and this administration has said about going out and being competitive and transparent, yet we've seen time after time they want to go to sole sourcing on many different items, not just in the Defense Department, but across the government, which I think is the wrong direction to take. I see my time's expired. I thank the Chairman, thank the gentleman for yielding from New Jersey.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Van Buren, flight testing for the F-35 began in 2006. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so.
All right, so that means you've been testing for over 4 years now, going on 5. Is that correct?
Very limited testing early on. I think this past year was the preponderance of the testing, and we're roughly doubling, as I remember, the number of flight test sorties this year from last year.
Can the current aircraft fly throughout this specified envelope?
Admiral?
Admiral Benlate, you're welcome to help answer if you need.
Yes, sir. The envelopes are being expanded as we speak. Just for scale, we have roughly 550 flights under our belt now, and we're approaching 900 total flight hours. The technical baseline review assessed that it would take up to 7,700 flights to complete developmental tests on all three variants, including the mission systems, which will take out into 2016. So as a matter of scale of how much flight test is behind us and how much is ahead of us, roughly 900 hours behind us, reaching for 77, I mixed hours and flights. So 550 flights behind us, 7,700 flights to attain.
What are the specific reasons that after 4 years of flight testing that the F-35 is still not cleared to fly throughout the specified envelope? Can you tell us 1, 2, 3, 4 what those specific reasons are?
Developmental flight test incrementally opens an envelope. It doesn't begin with a full envelope at the beginning, sir. So we know what envelope is required for the commencement of training by fleet ops, and so our testing is focused on progressing to that size of envelope for all three models, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. You're casting a view of the length of time we've been in flight tests, sir. There was only one test that we called it AA1 that was flying for the first couple years, so it was one struggling airplane not accumulating very much flight time, nor was it prepared or instrumented to expand the envelope. So we really have only begun to expand the envelope in this near the end of 2010. We will do so rapidly in 11 and 12. I don't make excuses for that. I just say what it was.
Hasn't the F-135 engine contributed to delays in the flight testing and the restrictions in the flight envelope?
Specifically, we had characteristic called screech in the afterburner that caused us to have to avoid certain portions of the flight envelope, but that did not slow us down from going to other points in the envelope to make progress, sir. We are putting kits in so that the aircraft can go back and catch that up, sir.
If you can tell me also, Mr. Van Buren, the Air Force variant you've said has been performing very well. So then the question becomes, why slow down by cutting production by 57 aircraft over the FIDAP and potentially dramatically increasing the cost per unit?
Well, the reduction in the recurring number of jets to be built was caused by the need to more robustly fund the development program, and so resources of on the order of $4.5 billion were put into the budget between the 11 budget and the 12 budget to fully fund that testing that needed to be done, software development that the Admiral mentioned, and to finish the program off in 2016.
How much per unit is it going to increase the cost over the FIDAP?
Our plan is to continuously reduce the per unit cost from LRIP 4 and beyond on a fixed price type basis.
Right, but during the FIDAP, how much will it increase the cost per unit?
Well, we don't know that. I think that will be a product of our should cost activity, and we have not received our proposal yet on LRIP 5, and that is our task, is to robustly reduce the price for all of these variants.
I hope that can be achieved. I share with Mr. Schuster the same concern, and with Mr. Bartlett, that government studies have shown that the alternative engine would bring down the cost over the life of the program for the F-35. And I'm very concerned that we be responsible with taxpayer money and that we also have an opportunity to increase job opportunity, which the alternative engine will do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to follow up a bit on the 1 versus 2 engine issue as well. I have no dog in the hunt, so it has nothing to do with my district whatsoever. I'm just interested in getting the best results for the taxpayer. And And it's interesting, this is the only issue that I've dealt with in the over 2 years I've been on the Hill in which both sides claim the same ground, and that is savings. The people who are for one engine say that we're going to save money. The people who say we're for two engines say we're going to save money. So both sides are using the same rationale. The best I can understand about this is that we're really looking at different budget windows. That one engine proponents say we're going to save money early on because we're not investing in that research and development. But then proponents of two engines say in out years that's where the savings are going to be because we'll have two sources and therefore we'll have competition. So is this really, by going with one engine, are we really in essence saving money in the short term in order to actually end up spending more money in the long term? And I'll open to anyone in the panel who would like to answer that question.
Again, we're constrained on resources here. In the near term, we know that that would be sunk cost, and we don't feel that that's in our taxpayers' interest.
Okay. Anyone else like to tackle that question?
I guess from our point of view as an uninterested observer, if you will, when we looked at this issue, it's been a few years ago, we made a number of assumptions. So we did really a rather theoretical look at the impact of competition. And I think it does more or less boil down to near-term and long-term, which can be interpreted many different ways. But I believe where the department stands now is that they feel that they're in a short-term affordability crunch and they're not willing to invest what is now probably somewhere between $2.5 and $3 billion in order to see if they can recoup that and more down the road. When we did our study, we found it reasonable to assume that over the long haul, over a 40-year buy of engines, if you competed them annually, you would achieve a return on investment that would exceed the investment.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate your honesty in that response. Do you have, and I know this is off the top of your head estimate, what the savings might be in the long term as compared to the $2 or $3 billion in the short term?
We don't have a number for that, but what we did was we used as a model the Great Engine War. I don't know that if you're familiar with that, but it was the result of the competition that was infused into the F-15, F-16 engine programs, and it was done as a result of the prime engine maker was not being responsive, reliability was lacking, cost was going up on the engines, and it was a sole source buy. So the Air Force at that time brought in competition and saw cost reductions. Initially, a great deal of cost reductions as the competition kicked in, and then through the program was very happy not only with the financial results of that, but also with they got much more responsiveness from both contractors and reliability went up.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. Then would it make sense that down the road, another year or two, we get our budgets in order, we're winding down our conflicts, perhaps we're able to invest that money? Would it make sense to open up a second source engine at a later date?
It doesn't make any sense to us, and we're comfortable with the efficiencies of having a single source. We find the contractor responsive. We find the cost coming down in a fixed price environment, and there are no major technical issues.
Okay. Okay, well, that being said, I thank you, gentlemen, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Kissel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as the Chairman said early on, thank you, gentlemen, for the work you do. That obviously this program is very important to our nation. And obviously we've had some issues with this program. And I'm going to go through some numbers that have been repeated. I know the Chairman said these and others have referred to them. But I think it's important we not forget this as we ask, assess where we are in the development of the F-35. 10th year of development that we started out with projected cost of $233 billion is now up to $382 billion. By rough math, that's 65% increase. We've cut the number of planes we're going to purchase by 400. In 2007, Congress appropriated and authorized 90, I believe, airplanes, none of which have been delivered. We were looking for 32 this year. We had less than 10% of the flight training completed that we wanted to. Referencing back to what Secretary Gates said in August 2009, that the rough spots are behind us, that we're moving forward. But yet, it seems like we've moved from 2014 to 2018 in terms of when we expect the production to be completed. From the authorization of 2007, we're now 15 months behind schedule. And once again, we're talking about the first production plane to be delivered next month. And Mr. Van Buren, I do find a lot of concern in my mind with you're saying short term, this is the best option for us with a single engine, when this program is anything but short term in nature, that we're talking about 95% of our fighter fleet. We're talking about years of development leading to years that this will be an operational plane. There's nothing short-term about this. Mr. Sullivan, we've heard the words, and we've talked about that the F-135 engine, I believe that the manufacturers reached that point to declare an ISR. They're ready to go into production, but my understanding is that they also asked for $1 billion more for development, changes, whatever. It sounds like we're anywhere but ready to go into production when you ask for $1 billion more. We have made words aplenty as to where we are. Where do words stop and we can be able to say specifically, this is what we've got to look for to be able to say we are on a production schedule that's meaningful, and that the projections we're making in terms of cost and delivery and expectations are being met? What are the key things we should be looking for other than just projections and words?
From our perspective, we believe the restructure that they just went through was very comprehensive. So I think you're getting somewhere close to a point where you are ready, you're beginning to feel like you could go to production. However, until the flight test program, and for that matter, until the models and simulation that they have are accredited, and most of the development issues in testing are further along, we believe that right now that the aircraft is too immature and the engines are too immature to go to production. I don't know. Maybe the program has more insight on that.
Well, and Admiral or Mr. Van Buren, we talk about going to production, but yet we hear we're not there. And so where are we in terms of going to production and actually being able to have, these airplanes rolling out and that meeting the needs that we have?
Congressman, I think one of the biggest issues that affected the program was a high level of change traffic that occurred notably in the first part of 2009. And it took the program some bit of time, delaying deliveries, to absorb that change traffic. If you look at the metrics on the production line with regard to travel work and span times and the new changes that are occurring, it's come down significantly. So I can say that the production maturity is far better than it was 2 years ago. That is not to say, though, that there's a lot of work, there's a lot of flight tests ahead of us and discovery, and that's why I think the changes that were made in the restructure were very prudent to reduce that concurrency and produce the aircraft at a lower rate of production, which would allow the Admiral and the team to make sure that we had a much more mature product coming down that production line.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen, once again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for testifying. I did hear about the issue with the testing. What was that, the end of last week where you had to ground the fleet? You say you're going to be up in the air today. Is that correct?
We flew yesterday, sir, with AF-1 at Edwards.
And no recurring problem with
No, sir. The generator configuration is different in the jets that are released for flight, so that's why they're flying.
Okay, good. Now, there have been advertisements in local newspapers, and I've heard different figures. The Pratt Whitney engine is how many billion dollars over budget right now? There's an advertisement that says it's $3.9 billion cost overruns. Can you put a number on what is the real number? What's the real number of the cost overrun on the engine?
The contract for the F-135 has a scope that includes the integration into the aircraft that is not on the F-136. So the size of the scope of work for the two contracts is so different. The expected, there was a reference to adding more money to that contract. We've talked about the technical baseline review. That looked at the work to go, sir, and the additional flights from 5,500 in the old plan to 7,700 in the new plan, 5,800 to 7, it's an 1,800 flight increase. There was a need to buy more spares to support that extension, so it was not related to a deficiency in the F-135 as much a preponderance of that money is to support the extension in the flight test. We are going to fly 12 we were going to fly 12 aircraft in test. We're now going to fly 18. There was 470 or 80 million that the technical baseline review assessed that was needed to address the integration of the Stovall issues that are not unique to the F-135. So there's the lift fan drive shaft clutch, roll post heating, addressing those technical issues. There are material solutions in hand. So the original F-135 contract, I'll go through my notes here, but it's currently projected with these cost additions to be about 8.2. So I haven't got the beginning portion in my head to give you a good delta in that growth, sir.
So cost additions are $8.2 billion?
No, that's the total of the entire contract from beginning,
right,
2002.
Okay. And to separate out if the engine, now you said you went from 5,800 to 7,700. What drove that additional flight?
It was not engine related uniquely, sir. It was the entire scope of the program. There were 4 characteristics of the growth in the test. There was the planned work was judged to be underestimated in cost and schedule. There was work that was not in the test program that was necessary to address risks that we saw. There was the schedule extension that needed to just pay for the more time of flight test and the people involved. And then there was no reserve. So those are the 4 characteristics that go in, and that is across the entire scope of work, aircraft and engine, sir.
Okay. Mr. Sullivan, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sir. I think the original contract, the development contract, began at $4.8 billion, and it is now 8.2, so it's a $3.4 billion increase.
But that's system-wide. That's not just the engine.
That's the engine.
That's the engine.
Yes.
Oh, so there is a $3.4 billion. Oh, well, the reason I bring it up is that, you know, we had a presidential helicopter that got canceled because it was around $3 billion spent and nothing to show for it. Then we just had an EFV program that was canceled that was around $3 billion, and you know, we're at this magic number here, $3.4 billion creep. You know, obviously that seems to be a magic number on your side of the equation as to when we've got problems. Of course, we have issues with it too when it grows exponentially like that, especially when we're told there's not enough money in the budget to fund an alternate engine, but we've got a $3.4 billion increase in the engine that we're buying. One other question, I don't have much time left, but I saw where there was about $1 billion cost increase in the development, and $600 million was for extra flight test engines. I'm trying to figure this out. There were 15 test planes, and then I imagine you buy a couple extra engines just in case. Now, I'm curious why you have to buy more.
The test program did not have spare engines in it. It did not have enough spare components and support to carry it through. That was one of the areas that was judged underestimated and under-resourced. So it was putting the realism back in the work to go, sir.
All right. Thank you, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Schuster was previously yielded Mr. Loviondo's time, and now he is in the queue for his own time. After that, we will move to those who arrived at committee after gavel fall. Mr. Schuster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just, for the record, want to know, as Dr. Fleming stated, I have no manufacturing facilities for this aircraft in my district. What I care about is that we're doing what's right for this nation. And the other thing Dr. Fleming said is the argument is not one engine versus two engines saves money. It's two engines we believe is going to be neutral. But it's going to give us that, I think, as Mr. Sullivan said, as we learned from the F-16 and F-15, financially it'll improve the response of the supplier to the Department of Defense is increased, and the reliability, the quality got better. So that's what I care about, making sure we're making the right choice, because Mr. Van Buren, you and I 25 years from now are probably going to be long gone from public service, and the nation's going to have to live with what we do with this F-35, being that it's 95% of the fighter fleet. So I hope we get it right, and I hope if I'm up here today talking about this, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope you're right if we go with one engine, because the nation will be at risk. But just as we go through this, we talk about cost overruns and the schedules slipping. As Mr. Kritz pointed out, $3 billion, and it seems to be the magic number. It's in baseball, too, 3 strikes and you're out. So this is too important, and I know that when we develop new systems that often happens, unfortunately, but we need to make sure we do what's right for this nation. And Mr. Sullivan, question to you is, has the program been receptive to your advice in the past? When you've come to them and laid it out to them, what you think, have they been receptive to it, or have they stiff-armed you? What's been the reaction?
Well, we maintain an auditor or program relationship, which I think is good, but we make recommendations. We typically make recommendations, make them available to the program and the department, and they weigh those and either concur with our recommendations or non-concur. Right. And I would say on this program, it's mostly been non-concur.
Right. Yeah, it's unfortunate to hear. And again, you would, just so make sure I'm completely straight on the record, the F-15 and the F-16, your testimony today was that there was financially positive. The supplier was much more responsive to the military.
The studies that we looked at, and they were mostly Air Force and industry studies, showed that there was much more responsiveness went way up, reliability went up, quality went up. And the financial aspects of that, we looked at the first 4 years of competition to get the percentage savings that we saw. So we didn't have the entire life cycle of the engines, but it was dramatic.
And your general experience in these situations is when you have competition, do you typically see financially the cost isn't necessarily stay down, but it doesn't grow as quickly? You get the responsiveness and you get the reliability. Is that typically your response typically what you've seen when?
I think that's what competition is all about. And in fact, the department recently has tried to make it more of a policy to infuse more competition into these programs.
Right. And what would you say going forward? What would you recommend to the Department of Defense on the Joint Strike Fighter program to see that past mistakes haven't been made? What recommendations would you put forward to them?
Well, right now, what we believe needs to be done is that we think the restructure was a really good, comprehensive restructure. Right. But they need to continue to maintain very close oversight. We think that software management is something that they need to pay very close attention. We think that they should consider, with the problems that the Stovall aircraft is having, I think the department would be good to try to manage that. We've thought about perhaps separating that out from the program so that the other two variants can get busy and get testing done.
Right.
The funding on this program is going to be critical for the department and for the Congress. $11 billion on average over the next 20 years. We believe that that should be very closely monitored and limited.
All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for your testimony. And again, I just would say in closing that I hope we're making the right decision. I think it's a short-term decision for a long-term system that we desperately need to make sure it's right. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that a lot of discussion on the new strike fighter, but also a lot of testimony on the existing equipment that we're using. And the structural integrity of the A-10, A-15, F-16, and F-22 has been in question and apparently to be dealt with. As I was reading that, I was reminded of an incident several decades ago in which a piece of equipment on my family's ranch needed to be repaired, and an old blacksmith was working on it, and he was beating the heck out of that piece of steel with a ball-peen hammer. About several decades later, I ran into a laser peening operation coming out of Lawrence Livermore Laboratories and now out in the public, which is apparently beating the heck out of a piece of F-22 equipment and strengthening it. That's what the blacksmith said. He said, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "Because it makes it stronger." And apparently laser peening does the same thing, and has been proven to be successful on the F-22. And the Aircraft Structural Integrity Program has found it so. So my question to all of the generals behind you, as well as those of you at the table, is are you considering using the laser peening process when you go about the repair or the maintenance or the strengthening of certain structural materials on the various jets that you're operating? For example, Admiral, tail hooks, where I understand it is able to increase the viability of a tail hook by 2.5 times. General, or Admiral, and Mr. Van Buren.
Congressman, I would like to take that for the record. I'm not familiar with that. Perhaps some of the generals in the second panel might be, but we'll take that for the record on the first panel.
Well, now you know why I asked you, because I figured you didn't know about it. Admiral?
I would say that I do have confidence, though, that the most modern methods of repair and improvement are certainly going to be taken advantage of, but I am also not familiar with laser peening specifically.
And I suspect most of the men and women behind you are also not familiar.
But that doesn't mean the industry team that we have and the technical experts in our government systems commands might very well know about it, sir. I just might not, so I could get back to you.
Now you know why I raised the question. My next question goes to Mr. Sullivan. Could you tell me the 3 most important things that we can be done to hold down the cost of the equipment that is being purchased by the military? 1, 2, 3.
Define requirements a lot better at the beginning of the program. Take enough time early in the program to ensure that you have a stable design for the full-up weapon system through prototyping and good systems engineering knowledge, and limit the development time to a reasonable kind of a horizon that people can actually think about, where you're getting added value capability to the field, but you're not putting yourself in a position where you're trying to invent and do trial and error on the fly. Incremental, knowledge-based acquisition.
Are we doing those 3 things?
The department, and in fact the Congress a couple years ago passed a bunch of acquisition reform. The department has embraced it in its policies. I think there are people within the government. I think this program is beginning to think along those lines, but there's a long way to go. I don't know that I could name more than 2 or 3 programs that I've seen that seem to be doing things in that reasonable fashion. It really does all begin with setting requirements properly.
What does it take to force the Department of Defense to do those 3 things? Another law? Apparently that didn't work.
That's a very good question, sir. I've been doing this for 25 years, and there's an awful lot of stakeholders involved in the building of weapon systems, and it can be a very complex proposition. But I don't know that laws necessarily, we pass laws, we pass legislation. I think at some point it's a matter of getting serious with the taxpayers' dollars.
Which is our responsibility.
That's all of our responsibilities, mine, the rest of the
I was
people on the
specifically
panel.
referring to this committee.
Yes.
When we see that it's not, I suppose we should pull the plug.
It doesn't happen very often, and it might, and decisions, tough decisions like that might make a difference in changing the culture. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson and then Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here today. And I'm particularly interested in the F-35s, the F-35Bs. I'm very grateful that I know how important they are to our national security, and I represent communities that are very supportive of their being placed. For example, the Beaufort Marine Corps Air Station and also McEntire Joint Air Base near Columbia. And in fact, I just met with the mayor of Columbia, new mayor, Steve Benjamin, and longtime city councilwoman Tamika Isaac Devine. And we were talking about that we've got the right climate. It's a meteorological climate so that people can train almost 365 days of the year. And then it's a climate where they're warm, supportive people. So y'all keep that in mind as you think of Beaufort and Columbia. I am concerned, Mr. Van Buren. On January the 6th, the Secretary of Defense stated he was placing the F-35s on Bs on a 2-year probation. And it's my understanding that over this entire year, the last 70 days, that the training, the test flights have been really very, very positive. The Commandant has stated if this continues, he'd like to see the probation status lifted and the normal procurement numbers restored as soon as possible. And so my first question is, what criteria was established to measure its progress, and what is expected during the probation period?
I'll let the Admiral get into a little bit more detail, but at a top level, Congressman, I would say that it is stability in the design that is not impacted by further discovery, and flight test sortie generations, flight test rates, issues of reliability, both in the vehicle overall as well as the propulsion system.
And Admiral, yes.
Yes, the test program is structured to go at full pace, either with or without probation. It did not affect the test program. It affected the procurement profiles. But to inform the department, the focus on Stovall unique characteristics, sir. So we are sharing with the Commandant and department leadership that each of the technical issues in view right now, which are preponderantly integration related to the Stovall characteristics of the airplane to land vertically and short takeoff. We believe we have engineering solutions to everything in view today. We're focusing on its weight, its key performance parameter of its vertical lift bring back. Every pound of weight is, needs to be offset by thrust. They all line up in the same axis, so weight is very critical, and we're focusing on weight. We're focusing how it will perform around the ship. We expect to get there this fall, both how it operates around the ship and how it appears it will be able to be supported around the ship as well. And then its ability to work through these issues and then be judged by the Systems Command to be worthy of an airworthiness flight clearance to be flown by the fleet in an unmonitored sense. Those will be the characteristics and progress we'll be closely helping the Commandant keep track of.
And I can't wait for the American people to see the STOVL capability and what that means in projecting our military's ability to save lives and make a difference. Mr. Van Buren, who will make the decision to remove the F-35Bs from the probation or take other actions?
I think it will be recommendations coming from Admiral Vinolette up through me to Dr. Carter, the Undersecretary, and ultimately the Secretary of Defense.
And again, I just want to thank all of you for your service, but we're really looking forward. And the communities I represent, they love the sound of freedom. And I can't imagine anything more meaningful to the people I represent than F-35Bs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I want to return to the issue of the alternate engine. I know there's been some discussion. I know many times people raise the issue of having an alternate engine as being one of budgetary concerns. I fall on the side of being concerned of not having an alternate engine, that if we go to a single source, we could have both problems with price escalation. If there are problems that develop with the engine, you could have certainly devastating consequences to a fleet that has a single source. And when you look at the analyses that have occurred that indicate that the Joint Strike Fighter will ultimately comprise 95% of our fighter attack force structure, I think you can become concerned about a vulnerability. But one of the concerns that I have is the manner in which we discuss this issue. Since it's a financial issue, we talk about it in terms of comparison. And when we talk about the 135 engine, the Pratt Whitney engine, people cast that discussion in terms of cost efficiencies in production. Admiral Mullen said you get savings by production levels. He says, I think with the kind of production levels we're talking about, that they'll come down, meaning the cost amounts will come down. Mr. Van Buren, I understand that you had stated in this hearing that you're confident that the prices would not be increased. One of the concerns that I have when we have this discussion is the difference between what is opinion, what is judgment, and what is fact upon which we can rely. When we talk about the people who come before us and even the people who sit in our seats, these are decisions that will long last us as we look to what the effects are. So I rise in my inquiry to the issues of to what extent is it legally binding that these cost reductions will occur? Are they projections that people are saying that of savings and production levels? When we go to one and we talk about confidence levels that prices will not be raised, is there currently any legally binding way in which it can be enforced that we get those cost savings? Or is this something that we're figuring and projecting? Because I think it does figure into our overall discussion. Mr. Van Buren, would you like to start?
Surely. What we know in the way of fact is a fixed price contract that we have with Pratt for LRIP 4. What we know is that there is substantial cost that will be required to continue the F-136 development. So our plan is to continue that cost reduction on the F-135 on a fixed price type basis.
But excuse me, but your fixed price contract, does it currently have a price reduction provision? I mean, does it say if you don't have 136 that your costs are a different amount?
No, it's simply a contract with the manufacturer on a fixed price incentive fee type basis for the quantity that we're procuring in LRIP 4.
And so it already figures in what Admiral Mullen is saying that he believes are going to be production savings and what you say are going to be confident of no cost increases, and that these cost reductions will be delivered?
There's a ceiling or a cap on the price that the government would pay for those engines.
Does that contract currently require the cost savings that we've heard as a result of the increased production that is expected? Or will it have to be will it have to be renegotiated? I mean, my understanding, my expectation is that there's going to have to be additional negotiation and documents that occur, that your current primary underlying document does not take into consideration the full timeline of production or the increases in production and deliver the cost savings that are projected or that you're expecting. Is that correct, or does your current document deliver those cost savings?
This contract is simply for the production quantity for the FY10 procurement of engine.
That's what I thought. So when we talk about what the cost comparison is going to be and the budget effects for future years, we're talking about projections and expectations, not things that are absolute as we go forward with these cost comparisons. Am I accurate in characterizing that way?
Well, what is absolute would be the non-recurring investment to fund a second engine. That is a known fact.
The cost per engine, though, is not known, correct? I mean, you can't tell me for every year what it's going to be. It's an expectation.
Well, as I mentioned,
it is a projection.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, the challenge for us, our responsibility, our commitment to the taxpayer and to all of you is to have to work very diligently on the cost reduction for this program, not just with the engine, but also with the airframe.
Which is yet to be done. My other portion of the point on this is for the issue of the cost for the 136. There are, of course, a significant number who have an opinion that in the long run that those will actually be cost savings. But I appreciate your distinctions here and your explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. In the interest of full disclosure, I would like to note that to the best of my knowledge, the only interest in my district relative to the engine is the 135, the prime engine. I think that they will do a better job if there is a 136. Some of my questions have been asked, not all of them. I will submit most of them for the record. I would just like to ask two questions now. Mr. Van Buren, wearing your OSD hat, Secretary Carter indicated last September that dual source procurement for the littoral combat ship would not be, and I quote, real competition, unquote. By December of 2010, Secretary Carter reversed his position because of the lower than expected ship prices. This is what competition does, gentlemen. Bid and endorsed dual source procurement for the LCS. In justifying this reversal and in stating dual source procurement of LCS is different than dual source procurement for the F-35 engines, the Pentagon has indicated LCS is different because all the development costs for the LCS have been expended. But this year's budget request for development costs for LCS is $1.9 billion, $785 million higher than last year. Can you explain this contradiction to the Pentagon statement and explain why the LCS acquisition model does not apply to F-35 engines?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not equipped to discuss the LCS. That's not in an area of the Air Force's portfolio. So I'd like to take that for the record and have the Department get back to you on that issue.
Admiral?
Sir, LCS strategy is beyond the vein of my awareness or ability to speak to. I'm sorry.
Mr. Sullivan?
I think I'm in the same boat, Your Honor. I wouldn't be able to speak intelligently to compare those two different acquisitions.
To whom should we address this question so that we can get an answer? If we ask this question for the record, will somebody answer the question for us?
Well, Secretary Stackley, the acquisition executive in the Navy, reporting up through Dr. Carter, are the most knowledgeable of this topic.
Are any of you in that chain of command?
No.
No? Is anybody in the second panel in that chain of command?
I'll have to.
I see a hand raised behind you. Okay, we will ask that question again in the second panel, and if you can't answer it, sir, we hope you'll go up the chain of command and get us an answer for the record. Okay, my second question. In your statement, this is Admiral Venlet, in your statement you indicate a fixed price contract has been signed with the contractor for $3.9 billion for 32 aircraft for fiscal year 2010. The amount appropriated for fiscal 2010 was over $11 billion. Given the yet-to-be-determined contract amount for the F-35 engine, because the fiscal year 2010 contract has yet to be signed, how much of the total fiscal year 2010 appropriation is still subject to cost plus determination?
Yes, sir. We contract on each year's procurement fixed price incentive for the aircraft, and we contract for the sustainment portion, where we buy simulators, support equipment, and sustainment activity at cost plus, since we're still early in. So the math, the difference between you cited a budget number and an aircraft fixed price engine contract number. In the space between those two, there is a portion for cost plus sustainment activity on the contract, but there are other costs in there as well. So I don't have that split out, sir, but there is a sustainment that is cost plus and will be on the next couple of years' contract.
We have 8 or so foreign countries that are interested in buying this plane. I know that some of them, I don't know how many of them, are distressed that there may be only one engine. To your knowledge, are any of these sales at risk if we don't have a second engine? Because if they are, then that simply drives up the cost of our planes, because we have got to spread the development costs across the universe of planes that are sold. If fewer are sold, ours cost more. Wouldn't just some minimal drop in foreign sales way offset any potential savings that you hope to achieve by this short term not supporting the second engine?
Mr. Chairman, I talk to many of the partner nations regularly. I know of no risk based on the engine issue.
I talked to one of them, and they were considerably concerned. I don't know if concerned to the point that they're not going to buy. And as the price goes up, we risk that some of them won't buy. And if they're concerned about a second engine, it wouldn't take very many planes not sold to increase our costs to wipe out any minuscule savings that you could achieve by not funding the second engine currently. I have one other question. We have a vote on, so we will recess very shortly, and then we will come back and seat the second panel. Ultimately, 95% of all of our fighter aircraft in all of our services, we hope to be this airplane. What percent of the fighter aircraft of our allies will be this plane? Do you have any knowledge of that? I don't know whether it will be big or small, but whatever number it is, I think it indicates a real risk. Should there be problems with the engine, there are occasionally problems with engines, and we have to ground the fleet that uses that engine. So far, that has not been a problem, because we have not had 95% of our fleet the same airplane. So if one plane is down because of engine troubles, we have several other airplanes. That will not be the case in the future. Not only will a second engine provide competition and drive the cost down and the quality up, but shouldn't we also have the second engine in some of our planes so that we will not be at risk of having only 5% of our planes available in an emergency should there be an engine problem?
Mr. Chairman, you asked about the partner nations. I'd like to take that for the record. I think it widely varies from country to country. For some countries, JSF is a very high percentage of their future force structure. For others, not as much. So I'd like to take that for the record.
So it's not only us who would have 95% of our planes grounded, but a significant percentage of the fighter aircraft and our allies would also be grounded, correct? That doesn't give you some pause that we might be in a situation where we desperately need fighter aircraft and neither we nor our allies have very many?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's an issue of risk, and I think the opinion of the Department right now is that the engine is performing very well, it's in a very mature state, and the risk is very low.
Those are very qualitative terms, sir. The slippage and the increased cost would indicate that some would not concur with those terms. I'm just having trouble understanding how it's in our long-term best interest to save a few dollars now and put ourselves at risk for the future of having increased costs and a lesser quality of engine. Competition always makes things better and cheaper. And having only one engine so that if that is grounded, essentially our whole fleet is grounded for all of our services, and a major part of the fleet for all of our allies. I would hope that would give you considerable pause as we look to the future. And I think that this short-term expediency of saving a few $billion now, that we'll pay dearly for that in the future. Thank you all very much for your testimony. We will recess now for votes, and we will turn so quickly as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Admiral Skinner, please proceed with your opening remarks, followed by General Roebling, Admiral Floyd, General Shackelford, and General Carlisle.
Chairman Bartlett and Ranking Member Reyes, distinguished members of the subcommittee, it is our honor to appear before you today to discuss the Department of the Navy's aviation procurement programs. Testifying alongside me today are Lieutenant General Terry Roebling, Deputy Commandant for Marine Corps Aviation, and Rear Admiral Kenneth Floyd, the Navy's Director of Air Warfare. We note the absence of Representative Gabby Giffords and send her and our shipmate Mark our best. With the permission of the committee, I propose to keep our oral remarks brief and submit our combined statement for the record that includes the specific questions requested by the subcommittee.
Without objection.
The Department of the Navy's fiscal year 2012 aviation budget request provides Navy and Marine Corps aviation forces capable of meeting the wide spectrum of threats to our nation, both today and in the future. This year, the Department of the Navy will procure 137 fixed-wing aircraft, 66 rotary-wing aircraft, and 20 unmanned air vehicles for a total of 223 aircraft. In the past year, we deployed the EA-18G in an expeditionary role to Iraq. The E-2D successfully completed an operational assessment. Our MV-22 fleet reached 100,000 flight hours. The AH-1 Zulu successfully completed operational test and entered full-rate production. And the CH-53K completed its critical design review. And with the leadership of Congress, we signed a multi-year procurement contract for the FN-18 and E-18G, which saved the taxpayers $605 million, and we are moving forward on the next MH-60 multi-year procurement. The Department of the Navy has emerged more confident that the essential F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program has been positioned for success. Taking into account the restructuring of the program approved by Secretary Gates last December, we reviewed our tactical aircraft inventory projections and initiated strong steps to mitigate the strike fighter shortfall to the operational commanders by increasing FNA-18 E&F procurement quantity by 41 aircraft and including funds to extend the life of 150 Legacy Hornets. By doing this, we anticipate a manageable shortfall of approximately 65 aircraft that peaks in fiscal year 18. We are integrating Dr. Carter's Better Buying Power initiatives and are implementing should-cost parameters into our programs early where it can make the most difference, such as with the E-2D. We are changing our approach to contract types and structures to ensure that we get the most product for the warfighter. We are targeting affordability both in procurement and sustainment. It is our privilege to testify before you today, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Do I understand that you've made a combined statement for all of the group?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reyes. Is there another to testify? It wasn't clear to me for how many you were speaking, sir. Who,
Sir, I was
wishes,
speaking for,
who wishes to testify?
General Robling and
Oh, thank you. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Chairman Bartlett, Ranking Member Reyes, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for calling this hearing and for the opportunity to provide you with an update on the Air Force's tactical aviation programs. I'm joined this afternoon by Lieutenant General Hawk Carlisle, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Plans, and Requirements. We acknowledge Congresswoman Gifford's absence this afternoon and wish her a speedy recovery. Today, the Air Force is fully engaged in operations across the globe, engaged in overseas contingency operations, and providing support to the combatant commanders to enable them to successfully execute their missions. In the coming year, we will assess how the fiscal year 2012 budget aligns with our standing operational requirements, along with the upcoming needs of the entire Air Force. We understand your focus today is on the Air Force investment plans to ensure that conventional strike, air superiority, and rotary wing capabilities are adequate for executing the national military strategy with an acceptable level of risk. Our rapidly aging aircraft fleet drives our urgent need to balance between acquiring new inventory with sustaining our current fleet. We look forward to discussing how we can match the requirements with available resources in order to execute the national military strategy. Lieutenant General Carlisle and I thank the subcommittee for allowing us to appear before you today and for your continued support of the Air Force. I request our combined written statement be submitted for the record. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Without objection, all of the written statements will be in the record in full. Thank you very much for your testimony. Now, Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us and for your service, and most of all for your gracious comments about Congresswoman Giffords. We really appreciate that, and I know it really makes a difference to her staff and family members as well. So thank you very much for that. I have a question for General Carlisle, General Roebling, and Admiral Floyd. The committee has been told many times that the F-35 is a must-have weapon system for the future. I guess the most basic question is, why is that the case? What about the F-35? What about the F-35? I guess do we have in order to succeed in the future? What is it about the F-35? What specific threats are we most concerned about, and how does the F-35 counter those threats? And the third one is, how does the F-35, which is a relatively short-range fighter, fit into DoD's overall need for the longer-range systems to operate in regions such as the Pacific? In whatever order you wish to take that.
Thank you, Congressman Reyes. I'll start if that's okay. Clearly, the Air Force believes that the move to fifth-generation capability is paramount as we move into the future, and that is to be able to operate aircraft and have freedom of action across the range of operations, military operations that would be required of us. We know that our adversaries, our potential adversaries out there, continuing to develop and field anti-access area denial capability, and that fifth-generation ability to penetrate those areas and still maintain freedom of maneuver, and if required, to hold targets at risk in an area denial type environment. So that's really the reason that we see it. And we see that those systems are proliferating throughout the world, and they're continuing, very recently, J-20 rollouts. You look at the short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles, surface-to-air capability, and integrated air and missile defense capability from our adversaries. We have to have that fifth generation to be able to maintain freedom of action in those environments. With respect to the legs, obviously, very much refueling aircraft, and the ability to get it close and then refuel in and out. Also, certainly in the case of the Air Force, the announcement by the Secretary of Defense of the new long-range strike family of systems, which is a family of systems which includes communications, electronic attack, long-range weapons, as well as a long-range penetrating bomber, all aid our ability to penetrate airspace and to go deep if required, sir.
And the specific threats and how the F-35 is unique in that respect to counter them?
Sure. I think the unique threats would probably be the adversary's advanced integrated air defense systems, SA-20s and SAN-20s, HQ-9s in particular, as well as the denial capabilities with respect to anti-satellite capabilities to deny access, as well as trying to keep surface combatants away from using anti-ship missiles would be the three that would be the most prominent, sir.
Anybody else?
Sir, I'll just add one of the things you asked in addition was what makes F-35 a must-have. I would say over legacy aircraft right now, even at Block 2B and eventually Block 3, but even starting at Block B, what you get out of the F-35 that you don't get out of legacy aircraft is this very powerful integrated sensor suite that's really designed to, centered around the digital aperture system. You get fused information displays. You get better joint operability for data transmission and communications. You get increased capability with your precision weapons, particularly JDAM and AMRAAM type missiles. And all of that combined gives you an aircraft really that's much more survivable, much more lethal, and less dependent on support aircraft, tanker aircraft, and electronic attack aircraft.
Very good. I'll yield back. I do have some additional questions, Mr. Chairman, but I'll submit those for the record. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Mr. Lobianda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panelists for being here today and for your service to our nation. I've got two questions I'd like to ask. First, we've read a lot about the future of the Air Force's fighter fleet, but I want to focus on a very specific portion of it right now. Due to the current Air Force recapitalization crisis, the FY12 budget request adds only about $15 million to the design and development of structural and capability modifications for the F-16 Block 40, 42, 50, 52 fleet. However, I believe a majority of the F-16s in the Air Guard fleet are flying Block 30s, which also includes the 177th Fighter Wing, which I represent. These aircraft are not in your current plan for service life extension program. My question is, how do you plan to maintain the air sovereignty alert mission if these planes can't fly, if you don't provide the same modifications to the aircraft at our National Guard wings? I think this is confusing and sends a very bad message. And second question I have is that I've been surprised by reports that the Air Force is considering a sole source approach to buying helicopters to replace its fleet of Hueys for the Common Vertical Lift Support Platform program. I anticipate a competition would be a fair one, wouldn't favor any one particular company or solution, and it's puzzling to me why a decision has not been made to have this competitively bid. Given that the mission is U.S. only, non-combat, non-deployable, can we be assured that the Air Force is going to give consideration to affordable solutions in this time of budget crisis that are commercial, off-the-shelf, not in the current inventory? I think it would be a shame to waste what could be up to billions of dollars buying something that is overkill just for the convenience that it is already in the Pentagon inventory. Whoever would choose to.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I'll answer your first question, and my friend Shack will answer your second question, sir. The first one referenced the F-16s and the ASA alert. Air Force fully funded the program for ASA alert, and clearly that is our primary mission, is Homeland Defense, and we are committed to that mission. With respect to the service life extension, how we're going to maintain that fleet, the Block 30, the pre-blocks as we call them, Block 25, 30, and 32, using structural sustainment, using O&M funding, those airplanes, our intent would be to fly those to the 8,000-hour limit of those airplanes, which brings those airplanes out into the late in this decade and early in the 20s. We're going to do a service life extension program to include structure and capability modifications of Block 40s and 50s, the newest, most capable F-16s. And as F-35s start coming off the line, we will move those Block 40s and 50s backfilling Block 25, 30, and 32 units. So the cascade of iron will be as F-35s come in to both the Guard and the active duty, then we'll take the newest F-16s that do have the SLEP modernization and both and capability improvements and move those into the units that have the older aircraft, the Block 25s, 30s, and 32s, sir.
Just a brief comment, if I could, that it just seems that without the modifications, if the F-35 continues to slip, these F-16 Block 30s are made more irrelevant and incapable of doing the mission. I would hope somebody would consider that. And for the second part of the question, General?
Yes, sir. If I might just elaborate on that for a second. The SLEP for the Block 40s through 52s leads to a production kit buyout in the just beyond this current FIDIP. That is prior to the time when the Block 30s, 25, 30, and 32 are expected to time out with their service life, which is between 2018 and 2021. So we still have time in the future, if we need to go back to those pre-blocks to further modify them to pick that up. It's too early to be putting that into the budget right now.
Okay.
Now, regarding your question about Common Vertical Lift Support Platform, clearly there are a number of vendors. We believe 3 or 4 different companies are able to produce the type of helicopter that we're looking for there. So we have a wide range of options to choose from as we finalize the acquisition strategy. I expect that to be a competitive acquisition strategy so that we can take advantage of competition and so that we can get the best arrangement that we can for the Air Force and the taxpayer.
Okay. Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Schuster. Mr. Schuster.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. My question, General Shackelford, on the Common Vertical Lift Support Platform, the CVLSP, my understanding is that the Air Force is considering, well, I guess in March you're going to come out with requirements on acquisition of the strategy, and my understanding is that you're going to put out there a sole source for the Huey helicopter replacement. Is that, can you confirm or deny that that's going to happen, a sole source contract?
If you mean by a sole source contract, selecting an existing helicopter in a sole source situation, that is not correct as a strategy.
Okay.
Per my just previous comment, there are 3 or 4 different vendors that are able to produce a helicopter to our requirement for Common Vertical Lift Support Platform. We have a range of options. At one extreme end is going to a sole source vendor for an existing capability, such as the H-60. That is not the direction we are leaning towards. I expect we will go towards a competitive strategy, which will give all of those vendors an opportunity to compete.
I'm sorry, you said there for one of the for one of the platforms you will go to an existing?
No, sir.
Okay.
No,
There's
sir.
going to be competition.
It will be a competitive strategy, as I understand it.
And you view there's at least 4 vendors out there that can meet the requirements.
There are 3 to 4 that can meet the requirement for CVLSP.
Okay. That was my only question, so I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Admiral Skinner, let me ask the question of you that I asked of the previous panel. Can you explain the contradiction to the Pentagon statement and explain why the LCS acquisition model does not apply to the F-35 engine? If competition and 2 LCS ships, those are pretty small classes, sir, compared to the number of engines that we would be buying for these planes. Can you explain why that's not a good model for F-35 engine procurement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. Secretary Mavis has stated that the littoral combat ship procurement, we funded the research and development for both variants of the littoral combat ship, and we also obtained the data packages for both of those variants. We have funded the research and development for one variant of the F-35 engine, the F-135, and the vast majority of the research and development for the other variant of the F-35 engine, the F-136, is in front of us. I've seen the CAPE business case analysis, and it seems to be compelling in that regard. But those are the major differences between the procurement of the littoral combat ship and the current procurement of the F-35 fighter engine.
But there is still some development money to go in LCS.
Yes, but there's still a meaningful amount of development money to be expended yet in LCS, is there not?
Well, we have both LCS-1 and LCS-2 are currently afloat. LCS-1 has already made one deployment to Southern Command. To my knowledge, we have committed to fully funding the research and development for both of those variants, and that was all part of our acquisition strategy, and the purchase of the design packages for both of those variants.
Why do we still have more money in this year's budget for development of the LCS than there was in last year's budget? Is this for the ship itself, or is it for the mission packages?
We have money in the budget for procurement of the vessels themselves, and we are still developing the mission packages.
Here's the LCS budget request in FY12.
But, Mr. Chairman, I can get you more information on that question and take that question for the record and get back to you.
Yeah. Your budget request RDT&E continues through 11, 12, 13, and 14 in decreasing amounts from $226 million, $183 million, $110 million, $82 million, up a little to $87 million in FY15. I was very supportive of buying both of the LCS ships. The competition did what it's supposed to do. Each of them believed that they had to be the low bidder or they weren't going to be in the game anymore. So they really sharpened their pencils, and we got bids that were like $100 million less than we expected, unexpectedly low numbers. I did not think we had enough sea trials with these ships to know which of those would be better for the multiple missions that we are buying these ships for. And so I was very supportive of this dual buy. And I'm still wondering why this is not a good model for procurement of the F-35 engine. Admiral Skinner, the Department has increased its emphasis on acquiring longer-range strike capabilities to address ever-increasing anti-access, anti-denial threat environments. These are obviously threat environments for the ships. This was evident by the Navy's desire to field an unmanned carrier-launched airborne surveillance and strike system by 2018, and the Air Force's plans to acquire a new long-range penetrating bomber by mid-2020s. I have a couple of questions and concerns relative to this. First of all, does this recent emphasis on the need for longer-range strike systems change the Department's thinking about its requirements, that is, the quantity, the mix, the fielding timeframes, for shorter-range fighter attack aircraft such as the Joint Strike Fighter?
Mr. Chairman, the systems that you referred to are the unmanned, or the U-class system, a surveillance and strike system that we're going to put on our aircraft carriers in the 2018 timeframe. We have a two-part process in order to do that. We have a current demonstration, the Navy Unmanned Combat Aerial System demonstration that we are performing to date. That system will operate off an aircraft carrier in the 2013 timeframe. What's unique about that is we'll stop our carrier operations to get that unmanned air vehicle on and off our ships, and we'll learn how to operate it from an arrested landing and a catapult launch and airspace means. All the knowledge that we gain from operating that unmanned combat air system will be put into the U-class system, the surveillance and strike system that you mentioned, and that system will fly in an integrated fashion with our carrier air wings in the 2018 timeframe. With regards to the requirements part of your question, I defer that part of the answer to Admiral Floyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the requirements and whether there's anything specific ongoing right now in the manned aircraft realm, outside of our normal requirements review process every year, the answer to that would be no. We're focused on the carrier air wing and the mix of Joint Strike Fighter and F-18 out into the future for our strike requirements.
I understand that we are re-looking at the mix of short-range and long-range attack platforms because of some anti-access platforms that potential enemies have, such as the Chinese anti-ship missile, which means that we need to stand off a considerable distance if that weapon is available to them. I have a question relative to the future. You're projecting the use of unmanned. That means you have not put a man at risk if you're going into a hostile environment. And I think we need to move more in that direction. But there are three capabilities that one needs to consider. One is our ability to be stealthy, and we're pretty good. But radars are getting better, and the ground-to-air defenses are getting better. With whom do you counsel to determine which of these technologies will run faster? Will we be able to remain invisible to them with our stealth, or will their radars run faster than stealth improvements so that they can see us? And what about these ground-to-air capabilities? With whom do you counsel to determine which of these capabilities will run the faster, and therefore what kind of assets should we be developing for the future?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll start with an answer on that. I think that we look to all the agencies, obviously DARPA, NASIC with respect to adversary capabilities and how well how fast they're developing their new systems. AFRL, the research laboratory. We look at the TR level of different technologies, technology readiness levels of different technologies, and we look at where we're at and what it's taken to get us to the position we're at with respect to our capabilities and our potential adversaries and where they're at and what we assess to be their time frame to get there. But I think at the core of this, Mr. Chairman, is it's our ability to integrate and operate jointly in a cross-domain capability, whether it's space, cyber, subsurface, surface combatant, air combatants. It's our ability to operate in a integrated, beyond joint and integrated fashion and use capabilities to exploit the adversary's weakness wherever that's at, to deny him use of those systems that he's developed and put forth so that we can achieve freedom of maneuver and gain access to hold targets at risk when we want to and when we need to.
I asked that question of the new director of DARPA. You mentioned DARPA, Regina Dugan. I asked if they had the capability to advise us on the projected improvement in technology so that we would know whether we were developing an airplane that was just going to be cannon fodder for the future, or would we be able to penetrate their defenses? She said, yes, they did that kind of thing, and as an example, she had with her an analysis they did of cyber and the malware and the defenseware that we are developing. It was a startling picture. The lines of code for malware have not increased significantly over the years, but there has been an exponential increase in the lines of code that we find necessary to protect our computer systems. If we can't bend that curve, by and by our computers will be consumed with protecting themselves, and they won't be able to do anything for us. And it's that kind of an analysis that I hope we're able to make for these technologies. Clearly, radar will get better. Clearly, we'll be able to do better with stealth. And clearly, there will be improvements in ground-to-air defensive capabilities. And again, I want to make sure that we are getting the best counsel we have. And these are very long-range programs. You know, it's going to be a decade or more before anything is in the field when you start a program. And when we get it in the field, is it already going to be obsolete because the defenses against it have run faster than those developments? And you indicated that you counsel with DARPA for this kind of thing.
Yes, sir, we do. We take advantage of what they're looking at. And again, NASIC and the entire IC intelligence community, as well as the research labs, Lawrence Livermore, AFRL, all the labs.
Thank you very much. We have a number of questions that we need answers to for the record. Let me turn to my colleague and ask him if he has additional questions.
Just for the record.
Just for the record. He has questions for the record. I have a number of questions for the record. Rather than take your time here, we'll just submit those questions for the record. I want to thank you very much for your testimony. I want to note that I've been to the floor 50 times, I think exactly, to speak for an hour on energy. And if you watch C-SPAN, you will notice that they pan the floor. There's nobody out there. But I need to know when I am at that microphone that there are somewhere between 1.5 million and 2.5 million people out there that are watching that. So you're talking kind of to an invisible audience. We're doing quite the same thing today. There are a lot of people out there watching, and this becomes a part of the permanent record, and a lot of people will be pouring over it in the future. So thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for the service to your country, and we will adjourn this hearing.